Good evening, everyone. I have the pleasure, my name is Liv Tørres, to wish you all welcome on behalf of Civita, the Nobel Peace Center, and not the least, the Women's Rights Initiative. Now, why are we here? We know that societies with equal rights for everyone and strong positions for both genders, for all genders, are doing better than those that are not. We also know that peace processes and peace agreements that have women involved last longer, are more sustainable, etc. I could go on like that, but we don't have time for that. We know the background. And we also know that, and we've learned this through history, that if we just sit and wait for others to give us our rights, we are seldom going to get them. We have to actually demand them. So that's why we are here. It's women in charge that we're going to focus on this evening. And with those few words, you're going to meet quite a few strong, capable women as we go along. But first, I want to introduce to you the founder of the Women's Rights Initiative, Mariam Nayeb Yazdi, Iranian-Canadian writer, human rights activist, and one who wants to make a difference. Please come, Mariam.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you for being here this evening. We are very excited to launch the first annual Oslo Women's Rights Initiative this evening with Women in Charge. The Oslo Women's Rights Initiative is an alliance of individuals and groups who believe that supporting women's rights activists is the most effective way to build lasting, sustainable change in the world. And Women in Charge and the entire Oslo Women's Rights Initiative would not have been possible without our partners and sponsors. So our partners being the Nobel Peace Center and Civita. And it would definitely not have been possible without our sponsors, the Greek Foundation, Ingrid Stange, Oslo Media House, and Fritt Ord. So I hope you enjoy this evening. Thank you so much for coming.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being here today with you. Women in Charge. Very exciting title for our event today. And this title actually made me think to pose a question to begin with my talk. Who are the women we are speaking about today? Is there any particular image of women in the region we are thinking of? Is there any one priority issue for women in the region? Or do we have shared perspective, shared interests for women in the region? Answering yes to any or all of these questions is very problematic because it shows a perception of women as undifferentiated, homogeneous group. For decades, women in the region has been portrayed as passive victims, helpless and powerless. The ways in which we look at women as a whole group and men as another violent group in the region has very much actually normalized violence in the region and to some extent desensitized people in the West, generally speaking, about the suffering and killing of the region. If we take the example of the war against Yemen these days, all what we see from that war is the starvation of children and suffering of mothers. Of course, this is an important issue, but also women are portrayed as a category, one category with children of the marginalized. Now, in this image, Yemeni people are only qualified for humanitarian assistance in its very narrow sense. So we don't think of them as people who are qualified for our solidarity and our political actions. And that actually manifested in the ways in which there was, and there has been, lack of support to Yemen in general, and the war against Yemen in general, although we see every day the killing and suffering of Yemeni people. So when we speak to the question of women, we must speak of structures of power, distribution of resources, political economy, neoliberal policies that push people into poverty, as well as states' roles in maintaining injustice and inequality in the region. As it relates to states, from both my experience, 25 years experience in working in the region, and my research, I have learned that gender norms and roles do not matter to states unless they serve their political interests. And I will give you an example from Jordan. The concept of guardianship over women, for instance, has been defended by the state of Jordan and its different institutions as inherently part of Jordanian culture. This law, which is a provision of the Jordanian personal status law, entails that women's rights to education, women's rights to travel, and women's right to the choice of marriage are controlled by men. However, the ways in which a state enacts this concept in practice is very contradictory. For instance, Jordanian women married to Palestinian refugees from Syria, and based on Jordan's 2013 policy of no entry to Palestinian refugees from Syria, are not allowed to get into the country unless they do so without their husbands and children. This policy actually is part of the norm that was in the Jordanian nationality law until 1987, that wives of foreigners are foreigners, and women are followers of their husbands. On the other hand, we have the Palestinian refugee women married to Syrian refugee men. Those women are not allowed to enter the country, while their husbands allowed to enter the country because they are not Palestinians. So in this sense, state does not treat them as unequal, as followers of their husbands, and under his guardianship. They are, in this example, equal to Palestinian men. Their Palestinian travel document is more important than the concept of guardianship and women as followers of their husband, and therefore they are not allowed to get into the country. Therefore, this contradicts what the Jordan states all the time advocate for this concept of guardianship over women as part of Jordan's Islamic authentic culture. This also shows that gender norms discourses in the Arab region are very fragile, tenuous, and contestable. And we must expose states' manipulation of the issue of culture and religion, because states use culture and religion the way they think it would suit their political interests. And we must not follow states' steps in doing so, particularly looking at very narrow issues like related to culture and Islam, like the hijab, because focusing on such issues only serve those states as well as extremist, conservatives, and far-right groups in both the region and Europe as well. The second issue I want to talk about is women's NGOs in the region. Feminist and human rights organizations have been tackling and addressing too many issues in their countries, from child marriage, different types of gender-based violence, discriminatory laws in the family, labor, and other civil laws. But the struggle that NGOs and women's activists in particular must take on now is the struggle for their existence. And I will give an example from Egypt. Feminist organizations like Nazra for Feminist Studies have announced the closure of their offices due to the criminal court decision to freeze their assets. Other organizations have been shut by the state directly, like An-Nadim Center, who serves survivors of torture and survivors of gender-based violence. Women's rights activists have been banned from travel for more than a year now. And some organizations like Sula have reduced the number of staff and social workers working to help survivors of gender-based violence. There has never been an all-out attack on civil society and activist lives, mobility, and freedom by the authoritarian states like now. And it necessitates a fierce and committed solidarity with women's rights groups and human rights groups in general in the region to mobilize efforts and challenge the restrictions on NGOs and on women activists in the region. My third issue is war and conflict in the region and how such impact women's life should understood not as a sectarian or religious, but as part of a neoliberal system of a globalized economic structure and the ideological features of militarism. And I will read some facts from the latest report of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Based on this report, US global arms sales have risen by 25% in the past 5 years. Nearly half of US arms exports go to the Middle East, and arms imports in the region have doubled in the last 5 years. The US, UK, and France are the main suppliers of arms in the region. Saudi Arabia is the world's second largest importer, and these weapons are largely used in the war in Yemen. Despite this, the US and European states supply over 98% of Saudi Arabia weapons imports. Another fact from the report, Israel increased its imports by 125%, receiving arms mainly from the US, Italy, and Germany. Obama, who started his term with the promises, and this is not from the report, Obama, who started his term with the promises of bringing peace and security to the region, ended his term in September 2016 with the announcement of granting $38 billion in military aid to Israel over the next 10 years. The deal represents the largest US military assistance given to any country. I'm not a peace strategist, but of course, this deal and the military aid does not and will not bring peace, particularly when we know that the American F-16 jets are bombing Gaza, small cities and towns in Palestine, and children playing in the streets. And this brings me to the question of Palestine and peace, which is a very important question in the region. And one issue here just to address, and that we must recognize if we want peace, we must recognize that the false and disabling symmetry designated to both sides in conflict resolution and peace initiatives has disqualified and denied Palestinians the right to just solution. Such interventions, rather than bringing peace, erase history and deny Palestinians the right to resist colonialism, a right that has been granted to all people under occupation under international humanitarian law, but absurdly not to Palestinians. In this context, feminist and human rights movement have a responsibility in decolonizing knowledge. It's not only supporting initiative, which is very important, and I don't deny the importance of supporting women's initiative in relation to gender-based violence in Palestine and other related to patriarchy. But sometimes, the narrative of patriarchy and gender-based violence have sometimes displaced the whole question of Palestine, shifting the focus from the collaboration of patriarchy and occupation and the settler colonial nature of Israel to one of culture and religion. To conclude, the solidarity women in the region and women in different conflict areas in the world need a solidarity that addresses militarism as a common context for struggle. And I'm borrowing here from Chandra Mohanty. A solidarity that exposes and challenges the violent authoritarian nature of states and colonial legacies in the region and globalized militarized systems, and most importantly, the relationship between the three in maintaining corruption, fueling tensions and conflict in the region, and undermining peace initiative, justice, and democracy in the region. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Oh. Thank you for having me here today. When I was invited to speak about my experience and work, I reflected on that, and I thought it's only fitting that I would go back to 2011, a year that has impacted and, of course, turned my life upside down. It started in early February 2011, inspired by all the revolutions and uprisings in Egypt and Tunisia. My best friend sent me an email, and he said, how about we organize a simultaneous protest that happens at the same time in Benghazi, in Tripoli, 5 p.m. on February 17th. And it never happened. Violence erupted on February 15th, and within a few weeks, there was war. I only remember back then that I was shell-shocked because in one moment we wanted to discuss how we could have reform, what we could do, how we could mobilize, and in the next I had to listen to bombs. And the intervention, which lasted for 8 months in a city where I lived, was unfortunately done by countries also like Norway. I never heard from my best friend again. He was killed in detention a few days after he was taken. And that's why I joined the February 17th coalition, which was a civil part of the opposition in Benghazi. And I joined in the humanitarian division. So I was, in the 8 months, trying to organize for a field hospital in Tripoli for the rebels when they entered the city. And in those long 8 months, my brother and a lot of my uncles were at the front. So I knew which side I was on. And finally, after not wanting, but also getting used to the bombs, the long power cuts, the complete besiegement, there was no internet working. Most TV networks were not working. The phone coverage did not work between the East and the West. So we were cut off from everywhere else in the kingdom of Gaddafi in Tripoli. The rebels took over the city and it fell within a day. We were very surprised, so we never used the field hospital. But I joined the military hospital immediately. And in those months, I worked as a field nurse during the war. Of course, I've seen so much, but I was already struggling, not just with the trauma of the war, but also seeing the effect it had on the people around me, how you somehow do not recognize people anymore. And while I have vivid images of like the face of the mother who lost her 4th son in the war, or like how for 2 weeks we've received mass graves every day, and I was responsible for taking families and friends who were looking for their disappeared loved ones. And I've seen how their souls broke when they found them, and the agony when they couldn't recognize faces in decomposed bodies. And that made my rage grow so big. I was in a dark place. And I remember when I worked in a hospital, I completely dehumanized Gaddafi's forces. But then one night when I had the time, I reflected on that, and I thought, that's not really me. So I thought I would punish myself, and the next morning I went to the attending doctor, and I said, I want to volunteer as a nurse for the wounded of Gaddafi's forces. No one volunteers for that from the opposition side. No female nurse would go into the ward. It was protected, guarded, and only doctors would go there. Only doctors who are obliged by their ethical profession to tend to them. No one wanted to tend to them. And I did for 2 weeks. I fed them, cleaned them, took them to the toilet. I never spoke to them. And I always wore my bracelet, which had the opposition flag, to show them exactly who I am. And they never looked me in the eye either during these 2 weeks. But one night, well, it was 6 a.m. in the morning, I was giving a round of antibiotics. And this young man looks at me and he says, you make me feel inhuman. And I paused because I looked at him for the first time. I looked at one of them in the eye. And I realized, and I saw his grief, his bewilderment reflected exactly mine. And I realized that we were both Libyans, caught on opposite sides of a war that we did not decide, we did not plan, we did not have a say in it. And frankly, at that point, we don't even understand why it started, why there was even a war. So I sat, held his hand, and we cried for a while. I didn't speak to him, and I never saw him again. But soon after, I saw the atrocities my side was committing. I saw the grief they were causing to other people. I saw them attacking helpless cities because they were stigmatized as pro-Gaddafi. And I was disillusioned, broken-hearted completely at the failure, but very disillusioned. And then I left the coalition. I went and I said, I don't want to take part in this anymore. And then I joined civil society. I started working on a psychosocial center for traumatized children and youth that soon took also beneficiaries from young people belonging in armed groups. With my full-time job, I was also involved in initiatives to support the first ever elections in Libya, working on gender-based violence and women's issues, ensuring there was a quota, which was successful. We had 30% in the first elections. And basically, like all the other Libyan activists, I ran on low gas and full fire. We worked so hard, non-stop, because in that brief 2012, early 2013, we were free and still hopeful, even if a little bit disheartened. But then another war broke out. And that was in August 2014, was the last time I protested ever, after protesting every week for 2 years. And during those two years, in 2014, I wondered then about our failures as civil society, as what is it that we did wrong, that we had to have another war, and why is this other war happening? So I had so many questions about peace, about why some men picked up guns and others joined civil society organizations and became activists, why some wanted peace and others thought peace was through bullets. That's why I left to do my MA in Peace and Conflict Studies, because I wanted to have answers to my questions. And during those 2 years, civil society activities dwindled so bad, but it never stopped. And at the moment, civil society in Libya is one of the few institutions, and I know this sounds weird, but it is an institution that is the only one that's unified in the country. So it was difficult to continue working after the Second War, but I continued doing that. I trained myself, I studied, and I wanted to be the best tool for other activists, younger activists, to transfer knowledge, train, and I do that still. I train in many peace networks. I implement projects, but also support initiatives. When you read about war, when you see it on the news, when you watch it in movies, you see the dead bodies, you see the destruction, the rubble, the loss and the blood. And that is part of it, it's true. But you never hear about the survivors or the people who live through war. You don't hear about the children who pick up guns and stand at checkpoints, leaving school. You don't hear about the widows who were never, ever in a position to be empowered to step up and take control of their families. You never hear about the women who start up businesses and build up hospitals, or the women in internally displaced camps teaching their children to love a country that rejected them. You never hear about the heroes, the fighters who don't have guns, who are willingly giving themselves up to have a hope one day in that country. You don't hear about them falling in love, having families, having children, smiling, watching movies while to cover up the shelling and the bombing that's happening outside. They don't tell you about the instability that hangs on your head like a sword, or that you are never safe. The fear, the suspicious, the paranoia, how you walk into a room and you strategize exit points because you are going to be attacked at some point. They don't tell you how once I reached the airport in Libya, I realized fully that I have absolutely no rights, that I am completely helpless, but all I do is standing up high and lifting my chin and acting like I don't care. They don't tell you about the teachers, who are mostly female, continuing to raise generations, the mothers. They don't tell you about all the amazing people who, despite the rubble, the loss, take the active, conscious choice to resist war by building lives. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Today I want to talk about the women's rights movement in Iran after the 1979 revolution and how the movement was faced with the discriminatory laws against women and how they dealt regarding changing these laws and practices. And finally, and then I want to talk about the roles that the international community can play on the women's rights movement in Iran. So after the revolution, many laws were changed under the pretext of Islamizations. Some of these laws pertained women, like the law which obliged women to cover their faces or bodies in public places, or the law regarding the minimum age of marriage, which sets the age of marriage 9 for girls. Some discriminatory provisions were enacted in the family law, like divorce became the right of the husband only in the family, and also some discriminatory provisions were enacted against the mother in the sense of custody of children after divorce. Regarding the blood money of the woman became half of a man, and the age of criminal responsibility for girls became 9 as the penal code. and that considering that many punishments in the penal code are very severe punishments, such as execution, that was much low below the international standards. And also women were barred from certain positions, like becoming judges. So after 1979, women were facing with these laws, plus the laws which already existed before the revolution, which was also discriminatory towards women, like the law which required women to have the permission of their husband for traveling outside the country, or the existence of honor killing or polygamy in the laws. So for 10 or 15 years after the revolution, there was no unified campaign or no established NGOs in that sense of a term. But this didn't mean that Iranian women were silent. There were protests during the first months of the revolution, for example, against the obligatory veiling of the women. And then slowly women learned how to protest against the discriminatory laws, each by their own way, like by organizing campaign or seminars or writing articles, books, or organizing workshops, or even lobbying with the politicians, and in different ways. And specifically when around 20 years ago, the reformist president came into power, Mohammad Khatami, more freedom were given to the society. So more NGOs were established and more campaigns were formed in order to challenge these laws. So what did the women's rights movement gain through all of these struggles? I want to start with the laws. It might seem more tangible to understand the change. Women's rights movements managed to change some laws, not a lot. I'm going to bring some example of these changes. For example, the minimum age of marriage, which was 9 after the revolution, it was risen to 13. In case of custody, even though some changes were made, still, even though this existing law is still not equal towards father and mother after the divorce, women's rights movement managed to make some changes in favor of the women. For example, before the amendment made in the custody law, the custody of the children after the divorce were given to the mother for girls up to the age of 2, and boys for girls up to the age of 7, and boys up to the age of 2, and after that it would automatically be given to the father. But now, according to the new changes, the custody will be given to the mother until the age of 7, and then the court will decide based on the best interest of the child. So in case of blood money, still the blood money of women is half of a man, but the difference is being paid by the government. Also, the share of inheritance of women in most cases is lesser than men, but women's rights movement managed to pressurize the parliament to make some changes in some areas. And divorce, also regarding the divorce, now with the new amendment in the civil law, women can also file divorce under certain circumstances. So it's not completely in the hand of the husband anymore. And also women managed to become judges at some level, not the presiding judge even though, but still it was, we can say it was a progress for women. These, and along with some other changes, we can say it was also changes that the women's rights movements managed to make in the laws. One might rightly argue that these are not a lot, and there are still a lot of discriminatory provisions within the laws, different laws, criminal law, family law, civil law. But what might be the impediment for the women's rights movement with all the struggles that the women have taken? In my opinion, the impediment for the movement is a guardian council, which is members are not elected by people. Our members are selected either directly or indirectly by their leader. And the guardian council is a very powerful council, and it has the right to veto the in Parliament's enactments. So at many points, the women's rights movement managed to make the Parliament to enact some laws which were in favor of women, to amend some discriminatory laws, or enact some laws which could bring justice, gender equality into the law, but the law were further down, at the upper stage, vetoed by the Guardian Council. But having said that, can we say that the women's rights movement was not successful at all? I think the answer to this is not also very simple, and it's not a simple no. Because even though women's rights movement might not seem very successful in changing the laws, I think it wasn't without, it had some other results from the movements. For example, women's rights movement managed to bring the discourse of gender equality and women's rights into surface and surrounded to all parts of the society. During the first years of the revolution, a politician, political party, for everyone, the issue of women's rights and gender equality was considered as unimportant, periphery at best, or sometimes even a distractive discourse towards the main role of advance. But now, with the help and struggle of the women's rights activists and the different campaigns that they have made, and some have been very innovative, all the candidates of various elections, presidential election, parliament election, even city council elections, they kind of try to bring the issue of women's rights with their agendas. Even some of the hardliners are doing so. And also the discourse has spread among even the religious segment of the society, and some religious thinkers within the recent years have clearly spoken and talked about the issue of women's rights in Islam, and many have opposed and objected to the obligatory veiling of women's hair and body in Islam. And some have even paid the high price of going to jail or living in exile for that. So I think this is something that we can't just forget about it. And that how the women's rights movement managed to spread the discourse with its various campaigns. One of the campaigns was now campaigning 1 million signatures to change the discriminatory laws, which this campaign did not have any leader, but all the women participating in the campaign started to engage with other people in cities, in park, and just let them know about the discriminatory provisions and gain signature addressing to the parliament to change some laws. So with the effort of the women's rights activists, they spread this dialogue of this discourse of women's rights was spread among the many segments of the society. And I think that's one good thing about the campaign. And another thing I want to talk about, I have been asked many times about the role of the international community and the women outside Iran and how they can help the women's rights movement in Iran. Before answering to this question, I have to say that the women's rights movement in Iran is not monolithic. Like there are many voices, many sounds in this movement, and women in this movement take different approaches and have different strategies. While some are more conservative and try to don't tackle the issues which are among the clear red lines of the government, and also use the methods which are not in the clear breach of the law. Some are acting more radical, and they even challenge the most taboo subject in the eyes of the government, and they are not afraid to break the discriminatory laws to protest against this discrimination. And both groups have their own reasons too. Like the one who are taking a more conservative approach argues that change needs to be done within the society and gradually, and that any drastic action which will lead to the imprisonment of women or forcing them into exile, which has happened a lot during the last 2 decades, is not good for women's rights movement in the long term. And the radical ones also argue that we shouldn't always let the government to decide the red lines for us and then challenge those stuff. And sometimes change needs through breaking the bad laws. And they bring the example of many countries where people manage to challenge the governments for making discrimination against the black people by breaking the law and doing civil obedience and this stuff. So also, what I'm trying to say is also regarding the issue of the international community and how outsider can help insider. Also, there are some divisions within the women's rights movement. I think the majority of the women's rights in Iran argues that the international community can be helpful, specifically in areas where due to the censorship, and where the subject is within the clear red lines of the government, it cannot be said within the Iranian media. So the international community or people outside in Iran can be the voice of these people, both regarding the covering of the news and the campaign and all this stuff. And also in helping the international community watch the Iranian government, for example, by assigning the special rapporteur on human rights in Iran. I think there's more consensus on that. But there are also some actions regarding the women's rights movement and pressuring the government into something, or asking the government to do something, otherwise boycott the government on some level. There are some more dividedness on this stuff. And I want to bring you two examples in this regard. For example, within the recent years, there have been two campaigns launched outside Iran by the human rights organization and activists. One of them asked the International Volleyball Federation to put pressure on the Iranian government and to deny them the right to host a tournament if it did not allow the women to enter to the stadium to watch the matches. Which is very strange why the Iranian government is doing this, considering that it is not even against Iranian laws. But for some reason, it's been like this for some years. And some women have been even jailed for just trying to go to the stadium to watch the matches. Another campaign was regarding the chess match and putting pressure on the Iranian government and denying the right to host a tournament if it does not allow women to choose how they want to wear dresses. And while some activists inside Iran were favor of these pressures and say that the Iranian government needs some kind of pressures and the Iranian women needs some kind of solidarity, and that this kind of sanction does not affect ordinary people, is not like economic sanction, which will affect ordinary people. There are some women's rights activists which says any kind of action against the country, the government, like isolation of the government, will lead to the isolation of its people, even either directly or indirectly. And for example, they bring the example that in this case, for example, if you deny the right to host Iran to host the championship, then Iranian women have to travel outside, and according to the law, women need the permission of their husband. And in the past, we had some cases when the Iranian women couldn't go outside, some even football stars and famous cases where they couldn't go outside because their husband did not let them go. And also that's how women's rights, how it's bad for the population in general to just isolate them. So in these cases are more sensitive, and there is a different opinions among the people inside Iran. But in general, I think there are more consensus in that Iranian women like to have a platform and want their news to be covered specifically when it can be covered by the official media inside Iran. And of course, social media has helped people a lot and has helped people break the censorship, but still inside might need more platforms outside the country. And I think this is one case that there is more consensus on that. Thank you. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to say. Thank you.
We are going to hear more from these strong women in a little while, but first, Aida. Let me introduce to you Aida Saadat. Please come and join me on stage here. I think you can sit here, actually.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Finally.
Finally.
Yes.
Now, there's so many layers to this. It's the most complicated region in the world, the most tense region in the world, filled with most conflicts, most refugees, and layers and layers and layers of suppression and discrimination. And in the midst of this, you come up with the initiative of the Women's Rights Initiative. You have a background yourself also from Iran.
Yes, I do.
And are very familiar with the issues, you know, the stories. Now, tell me a little bit about, you're the program manager of the Women's Rights Initiative.
Sure.
Why? How? Where did this start? Give us a little bit of background and your thinking.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here and for you and for the support that you gave the small group that we are it's just the start. We are off to a great start, I think, and I'm really optimistic about what we are doing. As you heard the speeches of three great leading activists and researchers and women's rights advocates, it's something that never stops. I mean, the effort for women's rights is a voice within every movement, every society. We can never stop thinking about it. And we have to amplify each other's voices. There are different issues. Every woman in the region might face a different, situation, different type of discrimination based on the culture, but based on the regulations and laws. But when we come together as women, we have a similar challenge that we have to face. We have to stand up. We have to survive. And that's the main undertone of the women's movement everywhere in the Middle East. As you said, we're inviting, women's activists from different countries. Obviously, the context in each country is different. They're facing different challenges. But there are similarities. There are differences. The question is where we want to break this barrier, to come together, to make a synergy and amplify each other's voices. As Afaf was mentioning, Yemenis women. There are women who are there and are trying to, raise awareness, but they're not being heard enough. So this initiative is trying to bring together all these, wonderful activists from different countries and start something fresh. I know that there are other initiatives. I have a lot of friends who are working with different alliances and solidarity networks, and it's a powerful voice everywhere. When women come together, there is always something good coming out. And it's the basic right of every woman to be able to speak up. So what we are trying to do is just providing some platform and getting to know each other more and learning from each other's experiences. So that's basically where we started the idea to, start something along with the other initiatives, and we will be sort of expanding it for the coming years.
I know the group is bigger. You've got a lot of alliance partners, etc.
Yes.
And then things have to sort of move one step after the other. Not everyone is ready to take sort of the podium and get streamed and all of that.
Yeah.
But where do you hope this will end?
Well, we have high hopes to get somewhere important. I think one of the ways that we can amplify each other's voices and help each other is to reach out to international community, because there are power dynamics, and we want to make a difference. And if we don't reach out to those, like mechanisms that have intergovernmental mechanisms like, CEDA or other platforms that are still available. If we can't, basically connect and, provide reports and connect them, these leading activists and the effects that they have made in their societies, I think it's going to, be powerful voice at the end. We have high hopes. We have started really great, and we have got a lot of good supports, including yours, and we'll see how it goes in the
Well,
long
we are
run.
definitely very glad to see women from the MENA region speak themselves instead of everyone else speaking on their behalf as well.
That's true. That's so true. And we will have 2 days of, this is our first event. It's a great kickoff, and we will have 2 days of, I guess, intense talks and conversations. We learn from each other's experiences. There are 12 other activists joining us for 2 days, and we'll discuss a lot of issues, and we will see how we can, expand this initiative in the future.
Very good. I think we should invite Asma, Afaf, Nargess back on stage so we can have a conversation, all of us. Yeah. How many times have you shared a stage like this before? Together?
Together, this is the
Yes,
first.
first
Together,
time.
this is the first time.
Yeah. And how does it feel? I have to ask you that.
Well, speaking about issues related to the region, it's usually difficult to summarize because there are so many issues that you want to speak about and talk about and think of and have the opportunity to discuss with people. But also it's a form of solidarity when a center like the Nobel Peace Center invites women to speak about their issues in a form of discussion and debate as well. This is a form of solidarity with women and their issues, which we for sure appreciate.
Now, I have to start asking you as well, because there are many issues that also split you. You come from different countries. There are national conflicts and tensions in the region. There are religious tensions and conflicts in the region. There are different cultures, different views of the role of women, etc. Now, you have that, all those issues that might split you, and then there are still some issues that unite you. How are you dealing with balancing out the differences? Nargess, maybe you can start a little bit.
Among ourselves, how are we? Well, for me, why I came here, and I was trying to. I heard very interesting stories and very different speeches actually, but I'm trying to learn from these ladies how the women's rights movement in their respective countries managed to face with these challenges, and that's what, because I think we kind of have we might have similar problems in the region in somehow, and so I want to see how the women's rights movement in these countries has managed, is trying to face these challenges. That's,
But you're going to find a lot of initiatives trying to split you as well. And I'm sure you've already experienced that other people will come and say, you don't have anything in common because your countries are sort of on opposing sides.
no, I think we have more in common than more in difference, actually.
Very good. Asma.
I see it, I don't know. I see it very differently. Because I have a I have a very special connection to activists. I mean, in general, activists are very close to my heart, but with women from the region, it's my people, you know? So even though I know the contexts are very different, and when I listen to a lot of their struggles, which sound like a million years from my struggles because of the differences, I still get inspired. They gave me hope and drive. So
there's a sense of belonging when it comes to activism and women's rights. I mean, no matter what challenges we're facing or what the context of our activism is, there is a sense of belonging when we see another activist, no matter which country they're coming from, just advocating for improvement of women's condition around the world, makes you feel home, makes you feel a sense of belonging, as I said, and you want to contribute because you feel it. And I believe that all the women who have started advocating for women's life are survivors of some sort of challenge or a pain. And when you start your activism, it never ends. It's a way of living. And I can see that undertone. I was saying to Asma that she has an undertone of activism, a women's activist, when she speaks. And it's so powerful that it affects the surrounding, the people around you. And that's how we, move forward. That sense of, unity. That's how we... So we are from different countries. We have never met in person. We have just started something, but I'm sure it will lead somewhere really great because we know each other deep within, and that's where the change begins. It's deep within. So it's not about differences. It's about where we can join forces and when we can help each other and how we can help each other. And we will obviously find those ways.
And let's acknowledge as well that difference is not always bad. It's good.
Yeah.
Because it opens your eyes to the other perspectives, the ways in which they look at things. And the most important here when we look at differences is to understand each other. Sometimes we might not agree with each other, but also we need to think and open our minds to what other women from different contexts, they would think of their priorities. I like the question because at least the question acknowledges and recognizes that women coming from the region are not one group, and they do have different perspectives, and sometimes there are tensions as well between women's groups. Mostly these tensions are actually political rather than related to women's rights, because you can't separate in any way women's rights from the political. And there are tensions related to the government, restrictions on NGOs, and there are tensions related to international organizations' practices in relation to funding and proposal writing and competition and all of these things. So there are different types of tension, but the most important thing when we come together and if we as I said, even if there are differences, it's important to understand each other's perspectives and to be open to think from different perspectives.
And you touched upon this, Nargess, also in your description of the various roles that different women's organizations were playing now in Iran. Huh? Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, you are all activists, you all have strong voices, many followers, and you all have this combination of higher education, academia, journalism, activism. Now, what role does education have in terms of promoting women's rights in the MENA region?
Yeah, we were discussing this issue earlier.
Today.
It has, of course. It has it is an important issue, education and access to education, but also education not always an indicator of gender equality. We were discussing earlier that, for instance, in Jordan, the number of females in higher education is high. In some cases, it's even higher than men. But still, when you look at the labor force, you would see men represent only 13% of the labor force. Where are all the educated women gone? And this is a serious question. Then we need to look at other discriminatory laws and practices, and we need to look at what kind of education is actually accessible and offered for women, mostly in health, in education sector, in areas where they think that these areas are for women. But we do have women in different sectors, in engineering and other sectors that were mostly thought to be male jobs. But in the end, even if you do have women doing these jobs, and women can stretch their gender roles in terms of having some jobs, but the issue is the education does not change the mentality, gender norms, and the ways in which we look at women as a complete human being. A law like the guardianship law limits women's roles and responsibilities and limit their contribution in the community as a whole. So education is a very significant factor. It's very important, but it's one of the things that we need to look at, and we need to look at it from the whole structure, the whole hierarchical structure in any state.
And yeah, education and a good portion of sort of fighting spirit, huh?
I have one question. By education, do you mean like formal education or raising awareness, like by education? Because if in a broad sense you mean like not university formal education, generally awareness, that's what the women's rights movement in Iran has focused a lot, and like the campaign 1 million signature to change the discriminatory laws. The main focus of the campaign was to raise awareness among the less advantaged part of the society, like because there is this conception about among many people of the society that when you talk about women's rights, some say, what do you want? You want Western life, you want subversion, you are against men, and then like with this campaign, it was shown to people that what we want is that if your father dies, you and your brother can both receive the same amount of inheritance, or if you want to work and the husband cannot bar you from working, like you can't bar him from working, and that's helped a lot in making the society be ready for this dialogue of gender equality. I think that's a very big step.
Well, I mean, no doubt that raising awareness is important as well, and that you are part and parcel of doing that very, very broadly. Now, before I open up for questions and comments from the room here, I'd like to hear also a little bit about where do you want to be in 5 years' time in terms of a collective? Because, I mean, every big, powerful organization and network starts small. It's about building one step after the other, trying to focus on what we agree on and not let anyone split us. But where do you want to be in 5 years' time?
Working
Aida.
on grassroots movements and working with grassroots movements. That's where we belong, basically. And we are not about, building a huge organization or, like other platforms. We are activists. The type of work that we are doing is different. So I guess what I personally envision in 5 years is we're building a huge alliance of women who are enthusiastic and have the power to impact the society. And that's where we're heading to. I can't, I have high hopes, as I said earlier, but still, in a general sense, where we can make change, we're there. Obviously with a more expanded network and more powerful voices from different countries. Next year, hopefully, we're trying to bring in more voices from other countries. We have limited this time because of our limitations. We're a small group at the moment. We're trying to utilize, and join forces with sponsors and, act as an agent to bring more voices to be heard and to connect them to the influential, people that can make change in the societies and can, make recommendations to the governments or work on the grassroots level or educate women in, grassroots level. We'll see how it goes.
Afaf?
Yeah, I think Aida answered the question in relation to the Oslo Women's Initiative. For me, I'm an activist, I'm a feminist and a researcher, and there are different areas where I'm engaged in the region. So at the activism level, it continues at different levels in different countries. And yeah, I think Aida's answer was complete.
It's always very difficult for me to respond about the question of time with activism. We are working towards issues that are for the future. We are working on things that we want to see in the future. But it's always the future somewhere at the back of our heads, but it's not really in terms of years, you know what I mean? It's like we work a year at a time, sometimes a campaign at a time, a project at a time. But I hope that the network will thrive and grow and that it will use all its resources so we could help younger movements, younger activists, mentor and transfer knowledge to each other.
Yes, I think I don't have anything to add to what Aida and Asma says, and that's pretty much it.
Building power from below, basically.
That's true, yeah. Bottom-up change. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. Very good. I'm going to open up for questions, comments from the room. We have a little bit of time, so please feel free to raise issues. And it's good if you introduce yourself initially.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Shabana Rehman. I represent a new organization in Norway. It's a new organization, but it is an old fight. I have a question for you, Asma. You told us so powerfully that everything they don't tell. What do you think will happen if the world starts really telling all those stories of all those heroes, the love, the daily life, the people? What do you think will happen then? What do you see will come and grow out of it?
I think, in a sense, we, as women especially, need to reclaim the narrative that is written about us, that is spoken about us. And in a way, when I speak about war, I always speak of it as our resistance to it. Because that's how the world should think of war. The world should consciously take the choice to say no more. Because it does not bring peace, it does not bring solution. And when you hear the stories of others, And I was not really good at sharing my stories. I had to learn from other activists and really inspiring people who share, because you always think it's not significant. It doesn't matter. It just happens. You know, like us women when we're like, yeah, I just did that and that, but it's okay, I'm fine. It doesn't matter. And we undermine the connection as human beings we have, because even though I come from a different place, you relate to me. And if you relate to me, and if I get to you the message of what I've been through and what war does, and you say, no more, then I've achieved quite a lot.
When I see you up there, I'm thinking this is a potential international coalition. And my question is, do you think if all women from the different countries are working together, can also strengthen individual fights in individual countries as well?
Question to any of us, right? Yes, of course, it should. Of course, because when you not only thinking of coalition inside the region, but also there is a need for international solidarity. The issues that we have been raising about women in the region, they are not only related to women in the region, they are related also to women in so many other areas, particularly conflict areas. When we talk about militarism, globalized militarism and political economy and new liberal policies, these are not only issues for women in the region. These are issues that affect women all over the world. And because of that, we need to find this common ground and common context for a struggle, to show that solidarity, that it's not only because this region is cursed, or because this region is violent, or because this region, there's something wrong about it. There is more. There is this new imperial wars that's happening, and the region is one of these regions. It's not just in the region. And that's why the solidarity in this time is more important than any other time. Because now it's happening in the region, and it's happening, we can see that there will be a new emerging other wars in other regions. And there is a new issues also here in Europe. If we don't tackle them right now, they will grow up. And they will be a threat to every single individual in this room and in Europe as a whole. Hatred, far-right groups, issues related to refugees and refugees. These are serious issues. And what's happening in the region is also affecting people here. And what's happening in the region is related, and it's the responsibility of many European states. Either they supply arms, or either they contribute themselves in bombing these cities. So because of this, because of the global nature of these wars, we do have the responsibility of coming together and having a solidarity together. And maybe we will not agree in everything, but at least to have this common ground for us to advocate for and against, particularly this issue of war.
Hello, my name is Ingrid Selin, and I think this was a very interesting presentations. And you talked about countries and contexts that actually have different contexts and different histories. Iran with the revolution, Libya with the war, and Jordan. I don't know so much about Jordan, but anyway. So what I was just wondering, because I've been working on FGM with many countries in Africa, and some of them, those activists, they feel they have to target religious leaders in order to tell them, give them another presentation of, for instance, the religion, Islam, and tell them that it is not obligatory to be cut, which is, and try to explain to them and teach them. I just wonder, do you feel as activists you have to teach religious leaders, or do you target the government first of all, or you target the media, or who do you try to target the most? That is what I wondered about. And yes.
You want to start, Nargess?
Yes. First of all, I just want to say that the FGM is not a religious matter, like in countries where are not Muslims, the practice is being held. And I want to just let you know about one initiative which was made in Kenya, I think, by a group of activists and anthropologists, that even though the practice was banned by the government, the families carried out still it, because they thought it was in the best interest of their girls. So what activists in that area did, and I think it's very good if we carry it in other countries, is like because they make a research to see why these families do, despite the fact that it is unlawful now, and that they come to that how the family was thinking that it's good for the girls before reaching puberty and this stuff. And so they made workshops about sexual education of the girls, and they call it circumcision through words. So, which was, the cutting part was deleted, and the girls were just given some educational stuff regarding the puberty, and after that, and this stuff. And it worked in that context, because the families had found a replacement for the circumcision, which was circumcision through words. So, and in each country, I think it differs, but I think activists need to be innovative in finding the way. And for example, in Iran, what women rights activists did is that for many laws, when they wanted to both challenge the government and convince the religious segment of society, they went to some religious thinker and asked who were reformative, or they were not conservative, and they had reformative ideas. And they asked for fatwas on an issue, and they showed this fatwa they published this fatwa, and they showed it to politicians, to the religious segments. They make a voice about it. So I think the important is to see where this resistance comes from. Is it a religious resistance? Is this a cultural resistance? And then try to tackle that issue, which is different country by country.
I would agree to that. I mean, many see activism as protests, loud, chaotic, but we develop to be strategists, negotiators, and mediators. And it's about mapping who I need to speak to. And if you want to really tackle the issue, then you have to speak to everyone. And religious leaders and priests are really, sad to say this, but they're really important, because it's a voice that it carries a lot of weight to the population. So it's difficult to say you have to educate the religious leaders, right? Because these men come with the holy power of God at their back, and you come as a woman who's really in a power dynamic as not on the same level at all. But what I advise a lot of activists to do, and what I do myself, is be sneaky. He starts to tell you that you're a jewel and so important in a religion, and tells you about all the stories of the women, of the wives of the prophets, etc. Good, use that. You say, yeah, so we are on the same page, so allow me to talk to that people, or can you give us a space to do that, or can you take advantage even of the sexism, because sometimes it is what it is, that's what you have, and you have to use your resources. So it is about being strategic, and you have to speak to everyone.
But also, it depends on the context and the issue itself. For instance, FGM, female genital mutilation, I wouldn't mind to do this, to work with religious leaders, because there is no mention of this practice in Quran or in Islam. It does not relate to Islam in any way. So religious leaders will be with you, because it's not practice unless they do have other interpretation. I don't know where they would bring it. But for other issues, it could be really very tricky for women's rights to engage with religious leaders, because in this way you would make a compromise. And here you really need to pick what you're doing. You need to decide. If you are taking this side, it means that you are agreeing on this compromise. There are certain issues, particular, and depends, as I said, in the context. If I talk from a context of Iran or Saudi Arabia or in Jordan, our state is not a religious state. Okay, Islam is the religion of the state, but all laws that govern the state are civil laws, only laws that govern family issues, which are related to marriage, divorce, and inheritance, are partly, not fully, coming from Sharia. So we have always this question of why. Why, when it comes to family issues and women's rights, we think of Sharia law, and when it comes to the tax system, banking, any other issues, no, we are a secular state. And in this case, we really need to challenge the state and the ways in which they pick and choose from religion. If I'm in a full, complete Islamic state, then I would accept the negotiation. But when I'm in a secular state in every single issue, but not my women's rights, then here the situation is different. But also women in the ground, we have to use so many different strategies, all of what you have mentioned sometimes.
I just forgot a small comment. I really liked your presentation of your experience of the war. When you talked about your own, it's like being numbed or blocked your empathy for the other part. And then you opened up your blockings and you saw the suffering of the other, and it came to you, and you felt responsibility for the other. So you went and you worked as a nurse, you see? And that, I guess, is very important, because also in peace, you can block your empathy. And I think that is patriarchy, that men block their empathy for the woman, because they can see a woman struggle, they can see her work, and they block their empathy when they see her as a person who is only can inherit only half of the man, or she has to be compensated only half for blood money for the man, that she's worth only half of the man. And it's the view on the universal human being that a woman is not seen as equal to the man. And that means that we have to teach the men not to block their empathy and to see a woman as a human being.
Aida, did you have any comments also about the choice of strategy?
Well, back in the years that I was an activist in country, I can't go back. I can't go back to Iran. So I'm basically an activist in diaspora at the moment. But we are connected. The good thing about Iranian network of activists, women's rights activists, is that exile wasn't a mean or an excuse to cut ties with your counterparts inside the country. So we have been trying to, reinforce our actions and do whatever we can within our, So back in Iran, I remember for 1 million signature campaign, yes, we did reach out to the religious leaders, but our major focus was to educate people, educate public, because as I said before, the bottom-up change will last longer. So that was the reason that we organized like hundreds of workshops in the areas, really, really rural areas that not many women have access to education. And they had needs, but there were no organizations to pay attention to those needs for education. So we were there as activists. And that's where I would go. Work with the public, work with women, and be their voice. That's what I would do. But yeah, sometimes there are different strategies to tackle an issue and address it. Sometimes, raising awareness and, speaking up with the media and, raising and organizing an international, global campaign about an issue. Creating hashtags on Twitter or, social media. Whatever works, but there is an issue that we have to address. So we have to find out what is the best situation that we can use and we can take benefit from. So that's the approach that we take. I believe everybody who has done, activism is familiar with this approach.
I learned a lot about Iran from one of my favorite Nobel Peace laureates, who happens to be Nargess's mother as well, Shireen Ebadi. And also that voices that are forced into exile are actually heard quite well at home as well.
That's true.
Both on sort of the positive side and on with the negative reactions. There's a lot of regimes that are incredibly annoyed about voices heard from outside. So
that's our job, to annoy the governments that are not doing, the best thing. That's what we do.
Very good. We had some more comments and questions, I think.
Well, if it's not too late, it was just about the social media, because I wanted to ask you how you're using social media in the different countries, if it's difficult or dangerous some places to use it. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Anyone?
Yeah.
Nargess?
Nargess, do you want to start?
I just want to say that people use social media in Iran a lot, even though it is filtered. They find proxy, and we have even one person who is under execution sentence because of the posts, his Facebook posts. So people use it, and it's still risky. It's like your personal newspaper, but you're the editor. You can. So.
Asma?
Yeah, in Libya, it's a bit difficult because not everyone is online. And while a lot of Libyans are on Facebook, which is the main medium we use, for instance, I wouldn't post everything that we do about our work. So they know we have a presence, they know we exist, we post something sometimes, but I can't boast that we've done a workshop on this and this and that. When I lied to the authorities to begin with, or an armed group in the city to be able to do the workshop. So we work a lot underground, and we lie. Like we say, we would have a workshop about women's health and children or something, and then it's about gender equality and how to be a feminist. So we can't say online, oh, we're doing the other thing. So we don't post, and that's also bad, because then the public are saying, where are you and what are you doing, because you're not visible. So we are caught in the middle of that sort of difficult situation. But I see on social media and the way we use it more as a safe space to discuss as women. So we have a lot of closed groups, whether it's for our projects or our campaigns or in general, has thousands of women, activists and non-activists. And that group that offers support, it's incredibly, incredibly important. Especially when, I think last year, there was a high rate of suicide among women in Libya. And then we had a closed group to offer support. We brought in all the social workers that we know, all the psychologists that we know. And we said, look, this is a space, a safe space. We were not accepting any male accounts, and whenever you feel, or you lose someone, or you feel that you don't want to continue anymore, we are here for you, and that was incredibly, incredibly important. But in most of my trainings, I give cybersecurity, so I tell the activists how to encrypt their emails. I ask them not to share things on Facebook messaging and use other tools. And that's very important, because some Facebook posts have once killed an activist. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, but social media has become one important tool for advocacy and mobilization in the region as a whole, of course, with differences based on the context. But women generally use social media very, very well and do have access to it. In Jordan, there is no problem when you advocate or use or mobilize it through this Facebook or Twitter, issues related to women's rights, discriminatory laws, anything related to the gender-based violence. And this kind of sphere, you would find also the National Commission for Women would be participating, which is part of the government, or some official people joining the campaign. So when it comes purely to women's rights, not related to politics and to issues related to gender-based violence, there is no problem. But in other contexts, as they said, it could be more harsh on women. In Palestine, it could lead to the invasion of your home or the arrestment of women and children. And in Egypt as well, although it has been used in the revolution very well, and it was one of the sites that people knew about the activities in the revolutions. But now it has become more and more difficult for women, particularly those who I mentioned, those who have been banned from travel, and they have been under the surveillance of the states, even when they post a few comments on the Facebook or Twitter. But generally speaking, it's one of the main tools are used to reach out to populations.
Aida?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's cyber activism. And a lot of people are getting involved more and more because, you know, the governments can't stop the flow of information. And everybody has access now. In case of Iran, it can be a bit tricky because, you know, we created, based on the hashtags and, you know, social media and access, we created cyber activism. And then Iranian government created cyber army to basically find out who is writing what, and they can locate them. And obviously, this is an ongoing battle between the government and the activists, the cyber activists. And there has been a lot of cases of arrests. There are people and activists who are still in jail for, you know, and have been issued long-term sentences for just managing a Telegram group, which is very popular in Iran. But the good point about the whole thing is raising awareness in a way that even the government can't block it, because, you know, there are some circumvention tools, and the activists who are in diaspora provide those tools to the in-country activists, and they use it. So this is some, you know, kind of ongoing battle between the government and the activists. And the interesting point is that even though the government has blocked, for example, Twitter in Iran, the authorities are still using it. And sometimes the hashtags that are trending are being used by the government authorities on the social platform, which is blocked by the government. So it's ironic, but it's there. It's and I think it's a very effective tool in terms of raising awareness and publicizing an issue, which is important if it's, you know, a specific situation or a case of, you know, specific person who is in danger, or as Nargess mentioned, we have had cases of people being in danger of imminent execution or that sort of thing. It has worked very good.
We don't have much time left. I'd like you all to have a chance to also come with a very brief concluding remark, but I'd like to ask you one question also before we start the round again. Because it strikes me that we've made numerous resolutions at the international level through the years about women's rights, equal rights, Resolution 1325 about women's participation, etc. And somehow there's not the ability or will to push it through in practice when it comes to specific regions, countries, national and regional level. We have also a few people who actually defend international interventions and actions with your issues. We have to do this and that because women in the Middle East and women in the MENA region, they're suppressed. So we have to help them by not talking to them, but doing things on your behalf. So I guess the question is, from your side, what kind of international support do you think should be given? What would you like to have from us in solidarity in order to promote women's rights in the MENA region?
Shall I start?
I'd like you all to sort of think loud a bit on that and come with also some other concluding comments if you have. So we do a last round. You can start, Aida.
Sure. So I think the real and effective support is the one that will let women in the region to identify the issue and provide support based on their terms, not what they think, I mean the international community. Because obviously they're more knowledgeable and they are the ones that know what needs to be addressed in international level and how it should be addressed. So give them voice, let them talk, provide them platform, be their voices, and let them identify the issue and connect them with the influential people who can help them. I don't want to go longer than that. I think I concluded just fine.
You already mentioned United Nations resolutions and too many conventions, either CEDAW or other international conventions that states in the region are committed to and they should comply with. But because of the double standards in general at the United Nations system, it's really very hard and very difficult to use these tools, although these tools are important. And our states are, by ratifying these tools, should domesticate them and should comply with these tools. But when we advocate for these tools, we have this challenge of that, bringing issues from the international community that in so many ways works against the region interest. So when we need to have a solidarity with women's rights, it's not just through certain issues related to women, because what makes the states and certain conservative group actually accuse women's rights of being external to the region or betrayals of the region or being Westerner is this way of not having, although there are some good solidarity groups based on the West, but at the United Nations in particular, of not having resolutions in favor of the region that has been implemented. When we think of the 1325 and we look, and also we have discussed this example, the issue of Syrian women being given a shadow council, not being in the council itself. So they are the shadow watching from outside. So these kinds of initiatives from the United Nations also undermine women's abilities and women's roles, and looking at women the same way as the states and conservative groups in the region think of them.
Thank you. Asma?
Well, I could speak for hours on international
I'm sorry you
involvement
don't have that.
and specifically the UN, but I'll try to summarize. From my experience and then from what I've read about women's movement and work, recognition is still on paper. It is still on paper. No one wants to invest in women because also they undermine our positions to only women's rights. And that's an important agenda. That's the core of a lot of our issues. But we also talk politics. We also talk security, not just soft security. And they need to start seeing it, because that's the smart thing. I mean, it's really ridiculous that we have to speak in a way that, oh, you need to bring women because they bring this and that to the table. But we never ask men, what are they bringing to the table? We never ask men, why are they qualified to be on peace process? But we constantly want a woman who's a superhero, otherwise she will be a shadow or working in the corridor. And I think that's also an individualist attitude within all of these structures. People are not in check with their own stereotypes of women. Yeah, so it is a big issue, but I think even though the international support, the UN support is quite important for a lot of women's movement, I think women's movements need to be a little bit bratty and say, no, not your way, we have to do it differently.
Nargess?
Yeah, I mean, I addressed this in my speech when I was saying the role of the international community. I mean, mainly, like what Aida said, I think the safest way, which is more consensus about it in Iran at least, I'm just saying about my country, is giving platform and giving voice to the subject, specifically the subject which is so taboo that it can be covered within Iranian media. So here the international community can help by giving voice and by watching through the special rapporteur and UN mechanism. I think these two are the safest, the most consensus.
Thank you. Thank you all. We've run out of time. We are very happy and honored that you chose to have this initiative here. And there is Miriam as well. And I think we are going to follow you actively for a long, long time to come. Now, we here at the Nobel Peace Center believe that there are too few women, not enough women, that have won the Nobel Peace Prize. So we are giving out Peace Prize medals. Unfortunately, they are out of chocolate, but with a big, big thank you even better.
Chocolate.
With a big thank you to all of you.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, and a big applause for all of them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Miriam, you definitely earned that. Thank you all for coming, and please, yeah, I'm sure you're all going to follow them like we are in the future. On social media, on live media, and help spread the word. So thank you.
Thank you so much.